What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS.
Established over 100 years ago, Watkins Books is one of the world's oldest and leading independent bookshops specializing in esoterica. We have the widest selection of esoteric books in the UK, and our friendly and knowledgeable staff are here to assist you in a unique ambience of our shop. So come and visit us in the heart of London as we're open every day.
The More Show is supported by Mindscape, Paranormal and UFO Matrix magazines, available for download on all major digital platforms. The comments and views expressed on The More Show are those of the people that make them and do not necessarily reflect the view of Kevin Moore, The More Show, or this radio station and its affiliate or sponsors. This show is for entertainment purposes only.
Broadcasting from the UK and across the world online, you're now watching the UK's only alternative late night talk show, and I'm your host, Kevin Moore. For the next hour, I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. On today's show, I'm joined with Rocky Elmore, who is a retired United States Border Patrol agent from Oklahoma City. Now, after engaging in a full-time career in the private sector, he joined the Border Patrol when he was 34 years old and served for the next 20 years. Rocky was assigned to Border Patrol stations in San Diego, California, Kingsville, Texas, and Tucson, Arizona. At the age of 54, he became a first-time father, at which time he decided to retire from duty and embark on his next adventure as an author, and he joins us tonight to discuss his latest book, Out on Foot, Nightly Patrols and Ghostly Tales of a U.S. Border Patrol Agent. Rocky Elmore, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Now, Rocky, obviously, I'm all here, all the way in the UK, and obviously, our border patrol is a little bit different to the US as well. So just tell us, the audience who may not know, what is a US Border Patrol agent?
Well, the U.S. Border Patrol here, of course, our borders that we operate on are all land borders, so we don't operate on the ocean much. So primarily, it's the U.S.-Mexico border is our main interest, and a lot of that, most of it is either some kind of desert terrain or mountainous terrain. So we wind up patrolling on land and hiking. A lot of our patrols are hiking, some checkpoints. Where I worked at in California in the first half of my career was a very mountainous area. So we did a lot of hiking around, a lot of tracking by people's footprints and foot sign. that sort of thing.
Okay, okay. And what was your job prior to being a Border Patrol agent as well?
Well, prior to being a Border Patrol agent, I was a barber.
Well, that's
And I just wanted to do something completely different, something a little bit more interesting. And I was approaching my mid 30s, and I knew my chances to change careers was running out. And I think the cutoff for the Border Patrol at that time was 35, and I was 34. And I joined up with them and just took advantage of it and didn't look back.
went with your gut feeling. I love that, man. I love that. Had you had any sort of interest in the paranormal at the time?
It was always interesting to me. I didn't have any real experiences, and I wasn't in part of any groups or anything like that. But it was always interesting. You know, if somebody had a good story, I was always willing to listen to it and entertain it. But I didn't have any experience with it.
No, no, and I guess all those years ago, you'd never have seen yourself becoming an author as well, a published author.
You know, when the weird things started happening, I started writing many of them down, so I'd have the dates, the places, the times, who was involved sometimes, because even back then, people were encouraging me to someday write a book, and I really didn't think I would do it, but I thought, well, it won't hurt to write a few things down in a journal, and I did. So some of the book is written from a journal, particularly the ghost stories concerning a friend of mine. The rest of the book is just written from memory.
Right. Okay. Okay. And what sort of land masses did you use to patrol? I mean, how open were these size of areas that you used to work on?
Well, most of the area that I worked in was wasn't any real fences there because they were counting on the mountain itself to keep people from crossing because it was very rugged terrain. It was the Otay Mountain, and then later we incorporated Tecate Mountain. They're twin mountain ranges. They're kind of like sister mountains. They're separated between a very narrow valley that runs about 10 miles in between them, called Morone Valley. And that's where a lot of the spiritual and ghost activity took place, was down in the valley. It's very, very rugged terrain. A lot of it is not even passable by horseback. So we had one dirt road, a single lane dirt road that led over the top of it. We could drive up there, and then we got out of our vehicles and we took off hiking, and we would just walk trails all night. Or sometimes we had many of the trails had sensors on them, so a sensor would bang off, and we would just go to the corresponding trail and just wait for the traffic to come up if it was good. Sometimes we had night scopes that could help us out. They would overlook an area and call us in, and we would just be walking around basically blind in the dark, and you would just do whatever the scope told you. You know, you wouldn't use a light or anything. If he told you to walk 100 yards south, you just walked 100 yards south. You didn't question it. You just trusted him to guide you in. So it was very rugged terrain. It took several days for the illegals to cross it a lot of times. So it was quite unusual job and quite adventurous.
Yeah, definitely being in the out and open as well. And what state was this in initially?
This was in California. My first 13 years in the Border Patrol, I was in California, just east of San Diego.
Right, okay. And was it normally your hours were sort of all over the place, were they? Or was it normally nighttime you were working or daytime or?
Yeah, they were rotating shifts. We rotated every 6 weeks. The shifts were 10 hours. 2/3 of the time you'd be working one of the night shifts, and then 1/3 of the time you would get to work a day shift. And the day shift kind of helped you orient with the geographic terrain to learn where some of the obstacles were, the cliffs, the drop-offs, you know, different things like that, landmarks. And then nighttime, you know, your vision was very, very limited at nighttime.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, absolutely. And how much training did you have to become a Border Patrol agent?
Well, initially we went to the Border Patrol Academy in Glencoe, Georgia, and that was for 5 months long. And we lived on base the entire 5 months. Nobody had their cars, so it was kind of like a 5 month long boot camp, military style boot camp. We got out of that. We all came back to our station, which was the Brownfield station, and then we entered into another 5 month long training program. And that would be during that training program, we worked nights all the time. And that's when they took us, hiked us around, showed us the terrain, showed us how to catch people, how to track people down, and basically kind of how to do our job.
Right. Okay. Okay. Well, let's go straight into it then with some of the paranormal activity that you witnessed. What would you say is one of your main stories that you got to witness yourself?
Well, the main story of the book is my friend that was killed on duty, and his ghost began to reappear. I had a couple of strange occurrences shortly after his death. One of them was him and I worked on the same shift, and we were on the same training unit at the time he was killed. The night he was killed, I had actually stayed home with a sickness, a short-term illness. So the night he was killed, I was asleep in my bed, and I heard some strange noise in the room with me in my bedroom, and it was a rhythmic type of beeping, almost like some kind of a distress call. And I got up and started looking around the room, trying to find out what was going on, and I realized the beeping was coming from inside my closet where I had kept my work equipment. So I got my equipment out, and it was my service radio, and it was doing this beeping. And I checked it to make sure that the radio was off, and it was off. So I turned it on and off a couple more times, thinking it could have been a short or something, and the beeping stopped. So I happened to look over at the clock, and my clock read 12:02, just after midnight. So I went back to sleep. The next morning, I got up, and I got a phone call informing me that one of my friends, Agent Luis Santiago,
Yeah.
had gotten killed that night, and the estimated time of death was 12:02, right after midnight, same time my radio had the incident. So I reported to work the next couple nights as usual. Nothing happened, nothing out of the ordinary. I think it's the third or fourth day we had his funeral and his memorial service for him. We did that on a day shift. I went back that night. I went back to bed. And again, during the nighttime, I was woken up by arithmetic beeping from my radio. I got up. This time I was kind of putting it together already. I noticed the clock. The clock said 12:02, just after midnight. I picked the radio up. Sure enough, the beeping was coming from my radio. This time, I couldn't get it to stop. I turned it on and off a few times, and it wouldn't stop. And I finally took the radio battery off of it to get it to stop. But I just had this overwhelming feeling that somebody was on that radio and wanted me to answer up to it, and I was just too freaked out. I couldn't do it. And that was the beginning of many odd occurrences that began to happen after that agent's death. And that's probably the main paranormal story of the book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, absolutely. You know, the chapter, one of your main chapters is based on that agent as well. What actually killed him? Just out of curiosity.
Well, we had been working a real dangerous area. It was at the base of Otay Mountain. There was a lake at the base of it, and they had dammed up a canyon and turned it into a lake. Well, the dam on the lake was probably about 130 or 40 feet high, and there were cliffs that surrounded it, and those cliffs were anywhere from 120 feet to some areas over on the west side of it a couple of hundred feet. They were working a group that had climbed up the dam, and he broke away from his partners to evidently chase somebody. When he got over to the cliff, his partners heard him scream, and he fell over. And they said they saw his flashlight tumble down the cliff. And they went over to check it out. Sure enough, he had fallen off the cliff. It had killed him instantly. Now, nobody really believed that it was an accident. Most everyone believed that there was a smuggler up there that nobody had seen, and that smuggler had pushed him off. And later in my career, I learned from several other agents that indeed that was the belief, that they did believe that a smuggler had pushed him off,
Wow.
and that was the cause of his death.
Okay, okay. So yeah, almost like it was almost murder then, wasn't it? To be honest. Uh,
It was a murder. In our minds,
yeah.
it was a murder. The individual was never caught.
No, no. Okay. We think this. We said okay. So you're pretty sure it was a smuggler. It wasn't anything paranormal in the sense that maybe caused him to fall from there. In your opinion.
No, in my opinion, it was just a smuggler. Now, officially, his death still ruled a
Yeah.
accident.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay. Well. How else did he try to communicate with you as well? As for what were some other signs that you had?
Well, that was the extent of his communications with me. Most of the activity in the book actually is between him and the illegal border crossers crossing the border. As he continued, from what the reports we got, he continued to do his job. There was an apparition or a spirit or his ghost that was out there identifying himself as a Border Patrol agent and as Agent Santiago, and he was stopping groups as they were walking through the mountains along the trails and was talking to them, telling them to stop. And the groups were doing exactly as they said because they knew as he approached that it was a ghost, and the groups were terrified. He would come up, approach, tell them who he was, identify himself, tell them that he had an untimely death, that he was very sad about it. There was something left unfinished, and he couldn't move on. And then he would tell the groups to wait right there. And within a few minutes, live Border Patrol agents would catch up with the group and take them into custody, and then the prisoners would begin to tell us about the phantom Border Patrol agent that had just stopped them, and they began to call him El Fantasma.
Wow. Wow. Okay, okay. Um, uh, that's incredible. And they were pretty sure it was the same guy.
They're pretty sure the same guy. It happened over and over. I wrote down probably about at least 10 different incidences of that happening, the dates it happened, where it happened, the time, basically what happened during those incidents. And it was somewhat strange in that his apparition or ghost began to appear actually
Yeah.
about 12 to 15 miles away from where he died from, which seemed rather strange in and of
Yeah.
itself.
Would you say that the land as well has something to do with it? That the land was it was very was it's sacred land? Would you say, or is
I, I, I would say the land had a great deal to do with it. I had learned from some of the local agents that were actually from California, and they were familiar with some of the local Indian tribes that had been there for hundreds of years.
yeah,
And according to some of those local Indian tribes, the Otay Mountain, which we worked, and Tecate Mountain were sacred to them. And they said there were evil spirits that lived up there, and human beings should not go up on those mountains. If they did go up on those mountains, that they would invoke these spirits and bring their wrath about. So I think that there is actually something to the land itself. It seemed like no matter where you went on that mountain, there was just this certain kind of presence you felt there that I had not felt in very many other places during my lifetime.
yeah. So there was some sort of Indian connection, basically, back many decades ago.
There seems to be like there was some definite Native American Indian connection to that area. Now, they themselves never went up on the mountain. They stayed off of it, and they never trespassed on it. And once we started going up there, of course, we went up there because the illegal alien traffic was going up there, so we went up to catch them. And it did seem like it stirred things up, and things started to happen. especially down in Marone Valley, the little narrow valley that separated the two ranges. There was all kind of things that seemed to be going on down there, spiritual wise.
Right. What? Okay, and these were reports that, obviously from other agents.
Most of the ghost sightings, other than the fallen agent, come from other agents.
Yeah.
The most of the ghost sightings concerning my coworker come from the illegal aliens crossing. But yeah, down in Marone Valley, quite a few agents had different encounters of various sorts with all kinds of spirits.
How willing were a lot of the agents to come forward for this book as well? Did some, obviously you've not included names, actual people, actual names on there, have you?
No, names, actual real names are left out, except maybe in one occurrence that when one agent said it's fine, he didn't care, I could use his name. The books or the stories are a collection probably of stories I had heard in private by people that didn't know I was going to write a book over, my whole 20-year career. Once I wrote the book, then a lot of agents started coming forward. Once again, they wanted to be not known. They didn't want their names used. They called me on the phone. They gave me more stories. They gave me more emails. I found out a lot more really good stories in that area that I had no idea existed.
Yeah, well, let's just go forward a bit here as well. What about stories of Bigfoot? How many of those sort of stories popped up?
Well, I had one experience when I was out there. All of the Bigfoot stories that I heard of anything that could be considered a Bigfoot happened within the first 3 years that I was there. Now, after I was there about 2 years, there was a massive fire, and it came and it burned all the vegetation off of probably about 80% of the mountain. After that fire, I never did hear of any Bigfoot stories again. But there was one major incident that I was involved in when I was a trainee. We were on the training unit. We're actually just a few days short of getting off of the training unit, so we'd been in the field for about 4 months already. And we were pretty accustomed to walking around at night. We knew what all the noises were. Noises didn't spook us. Nothing was going to go bump, so to speak, and catch us off guard. There was 4 of us total, 3 trainees and a training officer. We were walking along an area trying to work a sensor, and we had gotten lost basically in the fog. Now, where we were at, back to our east, maybe about a mile along the river, there was a supervisor had set up a thermal night vision scope, and it's one of the scopes. It was actually one of our older scopes, but it detects heat signature.
Right.
And that's what it hones in on, is heat. We actually had taken it off an old Army tank and adapted it to our uses. So we were paralleling along the river trying to find our way again, and we were going to the west, and we heard this one very big massive splash in the water, but we didn't hear any follow-up splashes with it. So that actually did catch us off guard, because we had not heard anything like that before, and if it had been an animal or a group of people crossing the water, we would have heard the thrashing of the water as they continued on across, which didn't happen. So we started to make our way over there, and as we got over there, everyone seemingly just started to get this very eerie feeling about the whole situation, and I know I did. I just had this very weird feeling come over me. It's kind of a feeling of foreboding and doom and hopelessness of whatever we were about to see in the water. At that point, I was thinking, whatever we're going to see over there is not going to be people, and it's not going to be an animal as we know it either. So we got up there, and we started to look around, and the first thing we noticed was that there were about 4 or 5 coyotes that were up on the creek bank, and they were also looking into the water where we had heard this splash. They seemed to be real concerned about whatever it was, and they were real quiet, and they seemed to be scared. I don't know if you're familiar with coyotes or very well or not, but usually when someone passes through their turf, they just go crazy. They raise all kind of ruckus, yelping and howling.
Right.
But in this case, they were very, very quiet, and they seemed to be real concerned of whatever was there in the water. We looked around. We could not find any footprints for anything going into it. We couldn't find any footprints for anything coming out of the creek. We could hear something moving around in there very quietly, but we couldn't see anything. We could see all the way across the creek, but we still couldn't detect anything. So, and we noticed that the coyotes were dry. They had not been in the water, so they had not caused that splash. So eventually we just come to the conclusion that it was just some weird anomaly we couldn't figure out, and we went ahead and continued on with our patrol, knowing that whatever was there was moving in back toward where this night vision scope was set up, and in a few minutes whatever was in that creek was going to walk right out in front of that scope.
Yeah.
And then the scope operator would see what it was, and he would call it out. So we left the area, continued on with our patrol, and sure enough, in about 20 minutes the scope operator detected a group of aliens coming down high off the mountain. So he called 2 other agents in to go work it. These guys had gotten into the area. They were out hiking around trying to get set up, and they were by the Otay River, just back to the east of where we were. A few minutes into their little operation, the supervisor called them off and told them to leave the area because he had picked up this very large predator on the night vision scope, and it was following these 2 agents around, but the agents didn't seem to be aware of it. And
Wow.
which was really quite bizarre because they were aware of the group that was actually a couple hundred yards away, but they weren't aware of this very large predator that was following them, and it was evidently was very, very close to them.
How big was it, do you think?
Well, the scope operator did not tell us exactly what he saw at the time. All he did, he called it out as a very large predator and said it's a very dangerous situation and they needed to leave. Well, the only predators we had in the area other than the coyotes were mountain lions.
Yeah.
We had never called off an operation before because a mountain lion showed up. We ran into mountain lions all the time. So it seemed really strange that anyone would be called off because of a mountain lion, and bears were not in the area either. Nevertheless, the supervisor told him, said, "You're being stalked by a very large predator." Said it could be a mountain lion or something, and if it is, it's the largest one we've ever seen.
Wow.
So he told the guys just to leave the area and clear out, and that's what they did. They left the area. And then the next night, during our nightly briefing before the shift started, they brought the subject up again, and they said that a very large predator was following these guys. These guys were unaware of it somehow, so we all need to be extra cautious of what was going on, and that this predator was the largest. Said if it was some kind of a cat, it was the largest one that anybody had ever seen, but they never did actually say it was a cat. So that was the talk of the station for the next few days, and then that died away. So about maybe 6 months later, the individual running that night vision scope, he took another job with another agency, and he moved out of state. So when he left, he told some of the other agents that he was close to what he had actually seen that night. And what he had actually seen that night, it wasn't a mountain lion, just like we expected. He said some kind of very large bipedal creature had come up out of the Otay River, same area from where we had our encounter, had come up out of the Otay River and had stalked these 2 Border Patrol agents down and was following them around, and without them knowing it. And they said that the creature dwarfed both of the agents, and it towered over them. Said the heat signature was absolutely massive. Said it was larger than any bear could have been. So it was implied that this creature was 10 to 12 feet tall, that there was no way this was just some very large person. This was some kind of very strange, unusual creature. And it was close enough to the agents that the scope operator could get a very good view of the size differential and the difference in the heat signature of what was going on.
That's
Now, he
incredible.
never used the word Sasquatch. Of all the Sasquatch sightings I heard my entire time in the Border Patrol, nobody ever used the word Sasquatch or Bigfoot because of the stigmatism attached to it. They would always just say the same thing, some kind of a bipedal beast or some kind of a bipedal creature. And that was what I was told was the actual story of what happened there. I was also told that story, that same version again by another agent, maybe a couple of years later, and he said that that story is true, that it was not bogus, that that's what happened that night. And then there were a few other lesser encounters with a creature like that over the next couple of years.
And the other encounters with that creature were they different stories in the sense that it was the same kind of thing, people being followed, or was there anything different in their stories?
It was somewhat similar. The beast was much more aggressive in the other stories. In the other stories, primarily the beast was coming after illegal crossers. As opposed to happening down around the lake, they actually happened up high on the mountain. In one story, a group of illegal aliens claimed that some kind of a beast had chased them over the top of the mountain. It chased them down into one of the canyons, and they claimed that they could feel its hot breath breathing down on their neck as it chased it. Oddly enough, it didn't catch them and didn't injure them. It just like it chased it out of its area. And then there was another story that actually did happen to a Border Patrol agent and a group of illegal aliens he had caught. He had caught a group of illegal aliens up near the top of the mountain, and as they were hiking back toward the top, it was getting about dusk, so they could still see somewhat. And they heard the brush breaking down below them, and the aliens all started getting real scared, and they got the agent's attention and said, "Oficial, mire eso," which in Spanish is to say, "Officer, look at that." And he looked down there, and there was this very large beast of some kind walking up on 2 feet like a man would, and he was beating the brush down with his arms, kind of in a swimming motion, and he was coming up the mountain, coming after them. And the agent said he thought the brush was probably about 6 to 8 feet tall, and this creature's arms, his shoulders and his head was up above the brush, and he was beating it down as he was closing in on them. So they all took off running, and the beast chased them. They ran for a little while, and then they looked back, and he was gone. So once again, he was very aggressive, chased them, but he didn't catch them, even though he easily could have.
Okay, it's just very strange, isn't it, how they just disappear as well. Because they talk about these creatures being interdimensional. I mean, I don't know if you've heard of that.
I have. At the time these things happened, I had not heard of that. But considering what had happened to my team and the other 2 agents on the night of our encounter, and then realizing that something was there because the scope had picked up its heat signature,
Yeah.
we realized that something was there, and we should have been able to see it. And the other 2 agents should have been able to see it as well, because it was not all that dark of a night. So that led me to actually start looking into it quite a bit more, and that's when I first come across the theory that some people think that it could be some kind of an interdimensional creature, and I personally believe that it is. I don't think they'll ever catch one. There are other stories, and I actually have them in the book, of an agent, which I don't know and I never met. I just took some of his stories that I had read during my research off the internet.
Yeah.
And he claimed that he had tracked them numerous different times in an area where he worked, not too far from my area, and that sometimes the creatures would just stop leaving sign in an area where it would be impossible to not leave sign. So you're talking about something that weighs, probably 1,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Should leave very deep footprints, very easy to follow, and then with no rhyme or reason, when they feel pressure, they just quit leaving footprints and they're just gone. And that happens over and over and over. And with the kind of manpower the Border Patrol had in this area and the kind of technology we had in this area, if there was ever going to be one caught, we would have caught it, and we didn't.
Have you still been receiving reports of the Sasquatch?
Not from my work area. I hear about them occasionally from other areas. Since the book has come out, I've been getting a lot of reports from military personnel, in particularly of one that has been seen numerous times over the years on Edwards Air Force Base, I believe it is. And I've heard tales of some even being seen at the Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, which is right in the middle of the big city. So it's quite strange that these beasts can be seen within a confined area where escape would virtually be impossible, where there's a lot of people, a lot of technology, and sometimes right in the heart of a major city, and they're seen and they're still not found.
Yeah, I mean, it defies the norm, doesn't it? In a sense,
It just defies logic, and I just can't myself, unless somebody catches one, I just can't believe that it's some kind of a primate left over. Not only that, but the sense and the emotion that our team encountered on the night of our encounter, it was like I felt some kind of emotion being projected onto me. The emotions I felt wasn't out of fear that I was feeling. The emotions I felt was for whatever we thought was going to see in the water. Before we even got within visual of the creek that night, the training officer drew his weapon, which was very unusual because when four of you are together, there's almost nothing that's going to scare you. But yet the training officer was unnerved enough that he drew his weapon before we got anywhere near a visual of the creek. Then one of the other guys that was with us that night, now we didn't talk about this encounter at all. We stayed silent throughout it, and we didn't discuss it later either. And it's probably just because it was so weird, we just didn't want to bring the subject up.
And that is strange, isn't it?
Yeah, but one of the guys did make a comment. Him and we encountered another group several hours later that night. So our team busted up, and the other two guys went one way, and me and my partner went another way. While we were off by ourselves looking for this other group, he asked me, he said, "What do you think that was in the water?" I said, "I don't know, but I was getting some very, very bad vibrations off of it." He said, "Yeah, I know what you mean." He said, "All the hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up." So he felt something too. So I know of the four of us that was there, three of us had something out of the ordinary going on that was messing with our emotions that I have never felt in any other time in the Border Patrol.
That is strange, and they say that they've got the ability for telepathy as well, don't they? Some of the researchers.
I believe if this creature is real, I believe that's probably the case, because these thoughts weren't coming from me, and I wasn't afraid. I wasn't afraid I was going to get injured. I wasn't afraid for my life, but it was just a very hard feeling to describe, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to have it again.
No.
It's not what I want again.
No. How fresh is the memory? Is it quite a fresh memory? Is it still?
I can remember that emotion and that feeling just like it happened last night. It has stayed very, very fresh all these years.
That's incredible. And then, okay, well, let's move on to another one then. Lights in the sky, as some will call UFOs. How many? Did you ever have a personal experience with sort of unidentified flying object? And then, obviously, to lead on from that, how many reports came in from other agents that contributed towards the book?
Well, there's actually not really anything in the book about UFOs. I have one little blurb. The first 19 years I was in, I had heard of no UFO sightings at all. I've been assigned to 3 different stations across the nation. I've did Texas, California, and Arizona. I've been on detail in every every state along the southern border, and I had not heard a single UFO story. Now, I know they're out there. I just haven't heard one. Now, my last year in the patrol, I came in shortly before I retired, and several guys were standing around talking about a UFO that had been picked up by some of our newer technology. They described it very thoroughly. It was the holy grail of sightings, I would say, but because it involves some of our newer technology, and I don't know if it's classified or sensitive or not, so I can't really go into discussion about that or talk about it. But that was the only one I ever heard, was that one, and that was just right before I retired. Now, since I've retired, while I was doing the Coast to Coast show, the former, he was a patrol agent in charge, which is the head man of a station. He was the head man of the station about 20 miles east of me. Now, he said that he had an encounter. He's also retired now. He called into the show and he described his UFO encounter. And that was the first time anyone ever told me of a UFO encounter while they were on duty. So I don't know if they're just not having them. I never really seen anything in the night sky.
Yeah.
And it seems like we should because we're out there all the time. So I don't know if they're just not happening or if agents are just keeping those really quiet.
Absolutely. But, well, what was his encounter when he came on the show? What was it? Was it pretty spectacular or?
It was a pretty good one, yeah. He was driving down one of the very remote areas, and oddly enough, he was in the Tucson mountain area, driving down one of the desolated two-lane highway, actually the only two-lane highway out there. And he was driving down it one night, and some kind of a craft had come up over the roadway and was, best I remember, was showing some kind of a tractor beam or some kind of a light was shining down and was kind of following him down the roadway. And he witnessed it and observed it for several moments. Best I remember his story.
Wow.
Now,
Okay.
he did agree a radio or a TV station, I believe he said, had contacted him and wanted him to come on and talk about it, and he agreed to do so. And when he told the chiefs of the sector that he was going to do that, they shut him down and said no, he was not going to do that. He was not going to speak about what he had seen. He was going to stay quiet, and that's what he did.
That's interesting, isn't it?
And that's the first I had heard of that. So that could be happening, and I just don't know about it. But I kind of considered the fact that I was not hearing a lot of UFO stories. That kind of gave more credence to the stories that I was hearing, because you would think if agents are just seeing things and making things up, if they're just making up ghost stories and they're making up Sasquatch stories, then why are they not making up UFO stories?
Yes.
And they're not.
Absolutely, and these are trained officers as well, just like yourself. It's so it's almost like our police officers over here. You're trained to know the difference between whatever it is that you're observing. Conventional craft as well, for example,
And make something logical out of it.
Yes, make something logical out of it. That's right, and a lot of this is not. This defies logic. This does. What would you say then is some of the more terrifying ghost stories that you came across? Was there any that was sort of haunting in the memory in the sense that they're the sort of poltergeist activity out in these open areas?
Yeah, I think all of the activity, or at least a good 90% of it that was going on down in Maroon Valley, I think could be more poltergeist activity, and it may well not be the ghost of people, but may just be some evil spirit that is mimicking people and just having a lot of fun terrorizing people. There are several spirits that walk around down in Maroon Valley that have been seen without a face, but by far the most disturbing ones I've heard has been this little girl, about 3 years old, in a white dress. Now, in Maroon Valley, both of the mountain ranges are off limits to people. One of the federal government agencies have taken control of Otay and Tecate Mountain, and also the south end of Maroon Valley that separates the two. And there used to be a couple of heavy metal gates that kept people out. One of those gates had been taken down. Maybe both of them have been taken down now. I'm not really sure. But there was some kind of settlement a couple of hundred years ago, back when Mexico still had that area before it became U.S. territory or before it became U.S. property. And that settlement was wiped out by one of the local Native American tribes. So there was a massacre, and they killed basically everybody on that ranch. And then in the early 1900s and late 1800s, they did some silver mining there, and there was a few little settlements there also. And I don't know what happened to them, but you can find some of the remains occasionally. And those settlements sat around where those heavy metal gates were that kept people out of Maroon Valley. And that seems to be where a lot of this spiritual activity is connected. And there was one little girl in particular that would roam that area, and she would roam an area 2 to 3 miles wide and 7 or 8 miles long. So she was roaming a very large area. One of the there's actually numerous different stories of her. One story, a scope operator was driving down Roan Valley Road. He was going to set up, and he approached that gate. Now, this guy didn't have a long time in the Border Patrol, so he had not heard any of the stories about this little girl.
Yeah.
So as he was walking up to the gate one night to open it, he was approached by this little girl in the white dress. And as she walked up to him, she did not have a face. And she continued to approach him, and he was so scared, he just took off running in terror. He ran back to the truck and tried to get out of there. And in doing so, he wrecked the truck, did some damage to the scope, and he got out of there as fast as he could. And 3 days later, he resigned from the Border Patrol. He did not want to take a chance of seeing her again. He just quit his job. Now, that's the only time I ever heard of an agent being so scared by an apparition that he quit. Most of the time, guys, they seen something, they just dealt with it, and they continued on, you know. But this guy, evidently, it got to him enough that he quit his job. Another encounter with the little girl was one night up on one of the ridge lines up on the mountain. An agent had heard a sensor go off, so he drove over to respond to it. He had a partner that was going to come help him, but his partner was about 30 minutes away, so he went ahead and got out by himself. He was going to go ahead and try to encounter the traffic and work it on his own. He got up, he got in position, and he seen off in the distance, he could see this, what he thought was somebody wearing a white t-shirt walking down the trail. It was still at a bit of a distance, but there was some moon out so he could see. And he really thought that was kind of comical because, you know, it's not a very smart guy that's trying to sneak around at night wearing a white t-shirt.
Exactly.
So he kind of chuckled to himself, actually, a second or two. And he held his position, waiting for the person to get closer. And as the person got closer, he noticed that it was not an adult, that it was a child. And he could not see anybody else with it. So he started to become concerned, and he left his position because he seen it was a child. He knew they had to be left behind from a group or was lost, and probably would not live very long up there, especially after dark, because the cats, the mountain lions, were not afraid of people, and they were so used to them that they would kill them and eat them on a fairly regular basis. So he actually took off running toward this little girl because he was wanting to save her. And as he got close, he said it looked like she had a very slight glow to her. And as he got close enough, then she just vanished right as he approached her.
Oh my gosh.
But he was left. He said it was a very, he was distraught afterwards, emotionally. Said it almost brought him to tears because all he could think of was just that little girl ghost, that, you know, she was just a child. And it just disturbed him quite a bit when that happened to him.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it would be a life-changing experience, wouldn't it? Anything like that.
Everyone that seen the little girl was very distraught and affected by it emotionally. Even if they were a seasoned agent, there was another agent, a good friend of mine. He had years in the patrol. This guy was one of those old crusty kind of guys, and things not going to upset him very often. And he was in that very same area nearby that ridge line, where the ridge line come down and crosses a road. and him and his partner was there. And they were sitting there one night about 3 o'clock in the morning, and they just both got a real weird feeling that something was out of the ordinary, and they began to look around, and there was a tree next to this road, and they looked over under that tree, and there was this little girl standing underneath the trunk of the tree.
Gosh.
And she was just staring at them. She had drawn a bead right on them. And right off the bat, he said he knew it was a ghost because there was no way there was a little girl in that remote of an area. But he said they just both froze. They didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to make of it. And they just stared at each other for a few moments, and then the little girl faded away.
And yeah, I mean, to prove that experience to anyone, except that it happened for them, you just can't, can you? But this really did happen by the sound of it.
It happened.
Yeah.
And probably had this guy not been one of those guys that was very senior, he didn't care what anyone thought, didn't care what you thought about him. He just going to tell what happened, and he always spoke the truth. And he didn't care if anybody liked it. He didn't care if anyone thought he was crazy.
No.
And he just put it out there.
Yeah. Was there anything? I mean, was there any ideas of where this little girl came from, in the sense of how she had passed, or was there any stories?
No, there was no stories of how she passed. There was actually no physical description of her. Was she a little Mexican girl? Was she an Indian girl? Was she a white girl? No one ever described her other than the white dress and her age.
How much? Well, no. Let me say that again. Actually, how many sort of deaths had taken place with Indians and cowboys in a sense where that there had been massacres back in the day when America was in its infancy?
Well, it seems like quite a lot in that area. That entire now, at the time that massacre happened, it was still part of Mexico. It was just it happened within 3 years of the United States getting control of it. So the Mexican army was dealing with it, and they had several battles with Indians in that area trying to secure the area. Now, the way Mexico and Spain did things back then was they gave these very large land grants to these rich people that had won their favor. So this wasn't just a large ranch like we would think of, a few acres with a couple of hired hands on it. This was like a city all to itself. It was a large area. I don't know how many people lived on there, but it was quite a few people. And evidently, most of them were killed. And I don't know if that was 30 or 40 people or 100 people. But and then the settlement that was there in the early 1900s with the silver miners, or the late 1800s, I don't know what caused those people to go away either. But I do know that not far from that area, the U.S. Army, when it became part of America, the U.S. also put an army there, a standing army, to protect the people who lived there, primarily from problems with the local Indian tribes. So evidently they were quite warlike back in those years. So I don't know how many people met untimely deaths in that area, but it seems like quite a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean, I said there, the Indians and the cowboys, but I mean, I don't, that's just based on films and stuff that I've watched. But I guess actually what I meant to say was it was the U.S. Army probably in that case that were the ones that did the biggest massacres.
And a lot of people were actually hauled off into slavery during those raids as well, especially the girls.
Course. Yeah.
I did find one raid of interest happened back in 1837. The one where, quite a few people were killed. Most of the teenage girls and young girls were hauled off into slavery and never seen again. I thought it could have been related to that. There was a story of a mother holding her child. The child was about 2.5 to 3 years old. The name was Clara in most of the accounts I found, but in one account I found they said the child's name was Claro. But it could be related to that because there was a woman holding a child about that age, and the woman was brutally murdered at the site. Now the two teenage girls begged for the child's life. I don't know if it was spared or not. The girls were hauled off as slaves. Now, interestingly enough, there is a female ghost down in Marone Valley that is seen without a face. She's been seen several times without a face,
Right.
and she wanders around screaming for her lost child. I don't know how this woman was killed, but when they say she was murdered brutally, I would think it would be some kind of a club to the head or something.
Yeah. 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 Well. Yeah. Well. Who knows? Why? A spirit would be attached to a certain area. But if something awful's happened and there's been some injustice, and time doesn't exist as it does for us where they are, then what may seem like an hour may have been a century. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I mean, fascinating stories. I mean, pretty creepy stuff, actually. It's given me the heebie-jeebies. What about any other paranormal stories that sort of come to your mind right now?
Well, in the book, I did have a ghost encounter of my own up on top of the mountain. Now, it was not one that I would consider a poltergeist activity. It was actually kind of funny. I was up on top of the mountain, and I had a partner to work with, but we had ridden separately. 90% of the time in the Border Patrol in California, you rode alone. And then you would just call someone on the radio to come help you if something happened. So a sensor had went off pretty much right on top of the mountain. And the sensor had been going off every night, and nobody was catching anything. What was happening was fog was rolling up this canyon, and as the fog come across the sensor, it would bang off. So we didn't know if somehow the fog caused it, or if illegals were just walking in the fog and using it for cover. So it was my turn to work the mountain that night. So I was up there. I called another guy to come help me out. We hiked down into this canyon. It was about a 45-minute hike down. We went down probably, 1,000 feet or so. Got down there, got set up. It's, probably 2 o'clock in the morning. And we wait, and nothing ever happens. So we came to the conclusion that the sensor was a false sensor hit. So we gave up on it. We walked back up to our vehicles. By that time, it was about 3 or 3:30. And we were just sitting there chatting. He had parked one direction. I'd parked the other, had our windows down. And he said, when you work midnight shifts a lot, sometimes you just want to take a little nap for a few minutes.
Of course.
So he asked if it was okay if he took a little nap for about 20 minutes, and then he would watch while I took one later if I wanted to. So I said, yeah, go ahead. So that's what he did, and he conked out for a few minutes. And I was looking through my windshield. I'd parked facing the canyon and facing the trail we'd worked, and I seen this individual walking up out of the fog, coming up out of that canyon. And it looked like it was another Border Patrol agent at first, but he was still out 150 feet or so. And I thought it was kind of strange because no one else was assigned up there with us, so I was kind of wondering how another agent would get up there and get down in that canyon and then be coming out. But I wasn't worried about it. I didn't wake my partner up. I just watched him walk closer. And I got out of my vehicle, and I was going to go around and talk to him. And as he got closer, I noticed that it wasn't an agent. And it began to take on a different appearance, more of a military type appearance, but not like a soldier. It was more like a pilot. And there had been several military airplane crashes in the area, and planes crashed quite a bit up there on that mountain. So I thought, well, I guess it's possible a plane could have crashed, and this guy survived it, and he's walking up, and he's just now getting out of the canyon. So I just hung around the vehicle, and this guy continued to approach, and when he got maybe 15 feet or so, he just gave me this little grin. I was about to speak to him. He gave me this, mischievous little grin, and his face started to glow, and he just dissolved right in front of me, kind of turned into a vapor, and passed right by me. And it was like he'd pulled a trick on me. It was like, I got you. You thought I was real. And I looked all around. I was thinking, what the heck just happened there? I got my flashlight out and I started looking for footprints, and because again, I'm trying to make it logical, you know. I thought it was a real person coming up, a live human being. It didn't look like a ghost, it looked like a person. So I start looking for footprints, and there's no footprints there except for my footprints and my partner's footprints. And this thing is gone, you know, and I just was standing there at 3:30 in the morning in the middle of nowhere by myself in the dark, and you know, one moment I had company, and the next moment I didn't.
Well, how scared were you in that situation?
Well, I wasn't scared at all. At first, it was kind of funny,
Right.
and then it was just got weird because I thought, you know, that there's no way that just happened. So I went back to my truck, and I got in the truck and I sat there and I started thinking about it, and I looked over at my partner and he was still asleep. And I guess after maybe 10 minutes, just a little bit of fear started to creep in, you know, when I got to thinking about it. A few minutes after that, my partner woke up and he said, "Hey, anything happened?" I said, "No, not a thing." Not a thing. I wanted to tell him so bad, but I couldn't, you know. What was I going to do? Yeah, while you was asleep, I seen a ghost.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, that, you know,
I never told him. To this day, he doesn't know about it unless he knows he's the one in the book.
Well, you never know, do you? You'll never know.
know.
No. What do you think it's done for you? I mean, having all these experiences and collating this book together from so many different agents, different, you know, border patrol officers. What's it done for you, as in the sense of what this reality means and what life means?
Well, I don't know that it has changed me that much. It hasn't changed what I believe. I've always been a Christian, so I'm more inclined, me personally, I'm more inclined to think that these are spirits, just disembodied spirits that are roaming. And that's what the Indians said. The Indians did not say that it was ghosts up on the mountain. The Indians said that it was evil spirits up on the mountain, and people should not go up there. So that's kind of what I lean toward, and that's compatible with what I believe as a Christian. That's compatible. Even in the case of my friend who was killed on duty, Agent Santiago, I don't really believe it was his ghost doing these things. I think it was a spirit had tried to attach itself to him, or did attach itself to him up on that mountain, and knew all these things about him, and had witnessed his death, and took it upon himself to get revenge for his death, because it seems very plausible that Agent Santiago's spirit got revenge for his own death. And that's what I lean, is that this is more along the lines of some kind of poltergeist activity as opposed to ghost activity, because none of the ghosts actually seem to be residual hauntings in nature. They all seem to be residual. They do different things each time. They do something different.
Yeah.
They interact, and they actually speak to people, which is extremely rare. And they have spoken even to agents. It's not just the illegals that have been spoken to. It is agents that have been spoken to. Another funny ghost story happened in Morone Valley. Two agents, one of them actually wound up, one was a supervisor, and one wound up being an agent in charge of an entire station. So these people are very, very credible and very reputable. And they had responded to a sensor down in Morone Valley one night. There's a little canyon that offshoots from Morone Valley called B Canyon. And they were down in B Canyon, and they had taken up positions on this trail waiting for some traffic to come through. Well, they had gotten on opposite sides of the trail, and out of nowhere, there suddenly appeared this young-looking Mexican guy. And he spoke to them. They didn't see him walk up. They didn't see where he come from.
Just came from nowhere.
But he spoke to them. Yeah, he was just there. And he said, "Oficial, prende la luz." And in Spanish, that means, "Officer, turn on your light," meaning their flashlight. Well, that's a very odd request from an illegal alien. So they figured, well, maybe he's hurt. So they turned on their lights, and instantly he disappeared. You know, he was playing a trick on them.
That's incredible, isn't it? Yeah, that's
So
incredible.
they interact, they present themselves to people, and they'll speak to people, which most of the time was very, very disturbing. But in that particular case, it's actually, maybe it did disturb them, I don't know.
Yeah.
But to me, it was kind of funny.
Well, it is, isn't it? And like your own encounter as well was kind of like, look, here's a bit of proof. Just a little bit of something just for you, an experience just for you. Yeah, yeah,
Just to let you know that we can come up and mess with you
yeah.
anytime we feel like
But
it, and you
not,
can't do anything about it.
but not harmful. Not
Not
harmful.
harmful.
No.
But like I said, that most of the times the encounters in Maroon Valley were on the verge of terrifying.
Sure.
The
yeah.
little There's a really good one if we got time.
Sure, go ahead.
Another one about the little girl in white. This is probably the best ghost story I've ever heard in my life.
Oh God, I'm going to be.
When
so,
I was
gonna,
told, I was close to the scene, and I had chills going up and down my spine when I was told. I was assigned to Maroon Valley one day, and so was one of my best friends. We were both down there. We were ridden separate. It was winter time, so dusk was coming on. It was starting to get dark, so we were leaving the valley. But we shared the valley with another station, the El Cajon station. So sometimes we would encounter their agents coming down as we were going up.
Right.
Well, my partner left ahead of me about 10 minutes. He left out, and about 10 minutes later, I left out. As I was leaving out, I seen one of the El Cajon agents coming down, but we didn't stop and talk. He drove on by. He was at a distance. We just waved, and we kept going. When I got up to where those gates were that most agents claimed were haunted, and nobody ever disputed them being haunted. When you said those gates were haunted, nobody laughed. So I get up to the gate, and there's my partner, and he's parked at that gate, just north of it. And I go through it, and I was wondering why he didn't go back to the station. And he had his window down, so I knew he wanted to talk. And I pulled up next to him, and he said, "Hey, there's something I got to tell you." He said, "Do you see that El Cajon agent that just went south in the valley?" I said, "Yeah, I did." I waved to him as he went by. He said, "I talked to him. When he come through this gate," he told me, "when he come through this gate, he opened it up. He looked over to the side. There was a little creek that ran next to that gate. He said he seen this little girl in a white nightgown floating face down in the creek. He thought she was about 3 years old. He ran back to his truck. He got on the radio. He was half in and half out of his truck. As he started to call for help, he looked over at the creek, and the little girl was gone. He said then he looked down next to his leg, and she was standing next to him, staring him right in the eye."
Oh my God.
He said the guy just froze. He said he was just frozen with fear and didn't know what to do. A few seconds later, the little girl went away. When he told me that story, I just had, my skin was crawling with goosebumps.
Yeah, is that? Can you imagine that situation? Very scary. Yeah, we're not understanding what it may be, or what the little girl's trying to get across as well. I mean, that's it's like something kind of a horror movie, isn't it? Yeah.
I tried to find out who the little girl was, but I could never come to any kind of conclusion. But I always dreaded every time I went into Maroon Valley or anywhere near that area, especially after dark. I always dreaded that I might see her.
Yes, I can imagine. I can imagine. Okay, well, it's been a fascinating interview, and we've only touched on a few of the stories here as well. I mean, if you when you get the book, there's many more encounters and a lot of first eyewitness testimony as well.
And I've had really good reviews in the parts of the book that are not paranormal as well. Only about 35% of the book is paranormal. But people have enjoyed the other stories just as much because they're so unusual also. There's nothing about the Border Patrol that is normal. It's all strange.
Well, yeah, but it's an incredible journey that you went on with this job. I mean, it came with the job, I suppose.
It did. I was lucky that I got to work that geographical area because these things don't happen everywhere. I consider myself very fortunate. I loved going out there. I know people find this strange, but once you get used to doing that kind of thing, it consumes you. It's extremely addictive, and I just loved it. I never got tired of it.
I bet it was very beautiful as well.
It was, especially when you would see the clouds below you and the sun come up in the morning underneath the clouds. It would look like a sea of fire below you. It was fascinating. It was the best times of my life.
Absolutely. Did you go back now at all to any of these places?
I have went back once to give a little tour to someone who does a radio show here, a Sasquatch hunter, and the Border Patrol is actually inviting me back. The Border Patrol is going to do a story about me and somewhat the book, and I think they want me to come back out there and do some of the interviews on scene at some of the places the events happen.
Now that will be cool. That will be really, really cool. And if people want to see any video footage as well of the types of places we're talking about, what would you suggest that they look at on YouTube? Is there anything?
They can find it on YouTube. Actually, Sasquatch Chronicles, I did an interview with them on a couple of the locations. Now, we didn't get to go up the mountain like we wanted that day because it was raining, but you can get a little bit of feel. We actually do one interview at one of the Maroon Valley gates, so they might enjoy that one.
Excellent. Well, Rocky, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Well, we've come to an end on tonight's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on all past and upcoming guests on the show via themoreshow.co.uk, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.